empty because your class is over. So we'll take a break kind of at that point. If there are some people left who want to ask questions, they can stick around, but you guys can take off, and I'll watch the time so you're not late in case you have another class you have to go to. And you can also take a donut on your way out if you don't want to, because we need to get rid of these donuts. Seth's also going to be doing a songwriting workshop this afternoon at 2, right back here in this space. So if any of you are free, you might want to come back for that. We're calling it a meta songwriting workshop, in which he's actually going to be, you don't have to be a songwriter, like he can go all the way from like, you've never written a song before, let's talk about that, to like, you actually have a song and you want to work on it. But then we're also going to be very meta, talk about, because Seth has, I said to people, I thought you had probably done thousands of songwriting workshops in your history as a musician, if you think about how many you do every year, for all the way from like 6-year-olds to people who are professional musicians or aspiring professional musicians. So for us in the writing program, that's really interesting because you have this genre, it's a songwriting workshop, and yet it's so different in different places with different people and what you have to think about. And you're not necessarily writing a lot of stuff down, although writing is happening in a songwriting workshop. But it really is so interesting to me from the ones that I've observed that there's a lot of activity going on, right, in a songwriting workshop. There's a lot of writing, but it's also about people thinking and talking to each other, so it's a really interesting form of writing, I think, too. So he's going to be doing that this afternoon, if any of you want to come back. I'm just going to give a super brief, unprepared introduction, because Seth is an old friend of mine, so be prepared for me not to sound like a professor. So I've known Seth for maybe about 8 years now, and my husband and I actually met him in Michigan when we were living in Michigan, and we went to a show that he was playing. I think it was when you guys were playing for Green Sky Bluegrass New Year's Eve show, actually, early on. And he and his then partner May just impressed the shit out of us, and we were like, we need to go buy everything these people have ever written. So we went out and got a lot of CDs, and we were super excited, and then we actually met them later on. And so the reason that I asked Seth to come here is because as a musician and also as someone who is an interested activist, really probably one of the most committed musician activists I personally know, and I know a lot of them, right? I know a lot of people who do this work, but I don't know anyone who does it as well as Seth does. And I think it's because he has a special magical gift for making people give a shit. That's why. So I asked him to come here because I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of connect us to not just writing the way we think of it, like school writing, stuff you have to do for class, but really thinking about how writing happens in the world. So he kindly drove all the way down last night. We didn't get here till 3 a.m. And now he's going to be brilliant for you guys. So he's going to probably talk for about a half an hour, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And I'm going to be videotaping Seth's answers in the Q&A. So if you ask a question, your voice might be on the tape a little bit, but I won't be videotaping any of you. And that's the same for the camera of the thing. You're not on tape. But it's possible if you're asking a question, your voice might be on the tape a little bit. So if that's okay with you. Okay.
Well, thanks, Joyce.
You're welcome, Seth.
I'm glad to be here. It's an honor to be in your presence and to be able to share some time, tell my story, and pass some things along. First of all, I just want to thank Joyce and say that I think Dr. Walker is a total badass and dear friend, just a very compassionate intellectual who has caused me to think in new ways and to think of my work in a more serious way. So I think you all are very fortunate to be, working with her, and a very smart move as well. So yeah, I'm excited. I feel like I've got a lot to share, and I brought my guitar, so I thought I could play a couple songs along the way, leave a little time for Q&A. And the snacks are a really nice touch too, when I saw that there were going to be donuts and coffee.
The writing program is we're good at snacks. Leave snacks.
Yeah. So how are you guys feeling this morning?
Good.
All right. Yeah. Cool. Coffee always helps for me. I do after-school workshops with elementary and middle schoolers 2 days a week. So part of the reason I came in so late is I was working with forest area kids yesterday, and it's a really rural school near where I grew up. I grew up on a farm in Missaukee County, Michigan, outside of the small town of Lake City, and the farm is called Earthwork Farm, and it's still kind of like my lifetime home base. But I was really fortunate to grow up with a lot of community around me. So my parents They did a lot of work with school kids, bringing the kids out to the farm to learn about like how to make maple syrup and how to tend bees and make honey and beeswax candles. My mom was an herbalist. My dad built a sawmill. Both of them, before they bought the farm and raised us kids there, they were working more traditional jobs. My dad was a wildlife biologist with the Department of Natural Resources in Michigan. My mom was a social worker. And they both really felt like, raising their family on the land and bringing a lot of art and opportunities for creative expression would be a good recipe for us. Now I have a 3.5-year-old. Her name's Iris. And I really kind of understand a lot of that creative empowerment, that choice to surround your child with creative people and opportunities for creative expression in such a more tangible way. It's really like the key survival mechanism. And working in schools like yesterday in Forest area, a lot of these kids are at risk. So they're below the poverty line, and some of them are dealing with some difficult home situations. So after school workshops are great for them. Finding a creative avenue can really save some of their lives, or at least keep them on a creative path instead of a destructive path. So those of us who have been, supported in going to college and pursuing writing at this level, we have a certain amount of gratitude to those around us, and it's also a testimony to your own self-determination, to choose this path and continue down it. And it takes a lot of work. Sometimes it takes a lot of coffee and donuts, but it's really great that you have a sort of a portal to expression and communication. Very, very key things. So one of the concepts that's been most useful to me as an adult to sort of see the future through and to see my work through is this concept of resilience. And I've been fortunate to have some really great mentors in my life. And one of whom, Joyce knew, it was a guy named Bob Russell, who was he was an activist and a researcher, and he started this nonprofit with his wife called the Nietawana Research and Education Center. And they did a lot of empowerment to all kinds of activists in northern Michigan, people pursuing social justice and environmental work in particular, as well as peace work. So resilience is great because it acknowledges how things are, and things are pretty dire in the world. There's a lot that we're up against, right? And it's no mystery to you guys. But when we look at the world through resilience, it opens up possibilities. So I love it, and I love to introduce this concept on a deeper level to younger people because it's refreshing. So anyone want to take a shot at the general definition of resilience? Well, I happen to know. It's the ability to absorb shock and maintain function. So resilience can be a property that you develop within yourself. It can be a property that your community or your family has. It's something we have to look at on a global scale now, is how we can be resilient. We know that we will have to absorb shock. So I know that I'm going to have to absorb shocks that I cannot see coming, and some of them, if I develop my ability to think in these terms, I might see coming ahead of time. But the idea is to not only maintain function, but in some ways to actually improve your function because of the way that you were able to respond to a shock. So a lot of the properties that we need to develop within resilience make a lot of sense. We have to be able to adapt. And that's something that nature is really good at. Within adaptation, there are a couple of terms that I kind of like to kick around. Modularity and redundancy. So modularity is the ability to do the same thing in a different way, and redundancy is the same way. So having a backup guitar is redundancy to the same thing. if I were to modulate, if I broke a string during my first chord or the first song that I play for you guys, instead of freaking out, I would figure out a way to just keep on going with the same song. Maybe I put a capo on, or maybe I make fun of myself and I break out the tuner and I tune up. So whatever line of work you choose, you know, you're going to need to be resilient, you're going to need to be proactive and not reactive, and you're going to need to be able to bounce things up. And I love that term because we know that we've been in situations where things are going down, but sometimes you can bounce things up to an even higher state. So resilience can really benefit us because we look in terms of possibilities. So even something huge like climate change, and we look at the effects of climate change on, say, the eastern seaboard. Resilience was created by scientists. It's been adopted by, you know, the military, the United Nations, lots of governments. The Pope and the Dalai Lama love resilience. So resilience can help us really learn how to look forward in terms of possibilities, even though we acknowledge that there will be shocks. One of the things I love about resilience is this term of governance. And this will lead me into a nice segue into a song, I think, after I talk about this. Governance is different than government. It's the way decisions get made in the community, and everybody participates in governance, you know. If I think of myself as an activist, activists are really important to governance, and activists historically have helped shift the conversation, shift the debate. They've helped frame issues in ways that communities are forced to respond to it, in ways that government officials, or like say here at Illinois State, you know, student-led activist movements can shape the future of a university easily. It happens all the time. So it's not government, it's governance. If I think of myself as an artist, artists are huge movement makers, right? Like every significant movement that's ever happened in the United States has had a very strong artistic component. You know, visual arts. I remember, you know, when I was at U of M in 2000, right? And this was like very early Iraq War. I was in Ann Arbor. And I remember there was the announcement being made by Donald Rumsfeld to invade Iraq, and they had to reshoot the announcement because there was a Diego Rivera painting behind him that was painted as a response to war, and they realized that this would destroy their argument and their campaign to have Diego Rivera there. He's too strong for the military-industrial complex. So artists have a huge say, huge say. Musicians, you know, we could make a list that fills this whole board of musicians that have changed the world. Musicians that have changed our lives, right? And I mean, I ask this question a lot when I do assemblies, and everybody always raises their hand, but how many of you have ever had a really bad day, but you listened to music and it made the day better? Yeah. So we know that we have the power of music at our disposal, in the palm of our hand, right? And for me, as a creative, you know, practitioner, as someone who uses language and music to create these little entities that can travel on their own, I know that I can go through, I can absorb shock and maintain basic function and be a resilient person, largely due to my creative practice and my ability to use my creative practice to participate in the world. So I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. And I also have come to step into my role in governance in a stronger way too. And it's kind of relieving to look at the way our communities evolve and the way that our decisions are made, even on a global scale, and to know that it's not all government. I mean, government can be corrupt and bogged down, and that things still get done. You know, there's obviously always more work to do. You know, and as MLK said, you know, the curve of history bends toward justice, and sometimes it feels like it's bending the wrong way. But part of it is that we're all on board with this. We're not just watching the deal go down. We're activated and we're engaged and we're involved in governance. So within governance, this is a really cool concept that makes sense to me. social ecological systems. So we used to separate the environment and society. In a lot of the dialogue that has happened in terms of governance in the 20th century, people really thought of these two things as separate, and since the Industrial Revolution, it's become increasingly impossible to separate social and ecological systems. What we do to the ecosystem affects society, and vice versa. So resilience did us a huge favor and just came up with this term SES, and ecosystem function is extremely valuable. And on a scientific level, understanding ecology is like one of the biggest underrated, achievements of the 20th century. If we look at social ecological systems, governance becomes even more important because all of us have to support social ecological systems. Our lives depend upon it. Our children's lives depend upon it. So without, soil quality, without water quality, air quality, we have no economic function. There is no marketplace at all. And you see increasingly leadership in the business community, people who are pursuing social enterprise. So they're starting a business with the intention of social responsibility, and the business follows. So you look at a lot of companies these days that are doing extremely well, they're sort of based in social enterprise. And some of my work as an artist and activist has led me further into this, and it's really encouraging. I went to the 4th Global Forum for Business as an Agent of World Benefit, which I love that title, at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland earlier this summer, and there were 400 people from all over the world. All of them are business leaders. All of them have started business as a social enterprise, and they've learned how to do, very, very effective stuff that in some ways government can't do. And they were excited that I was there leading songs and leading songwriting workshops. So we rewrote This Land Is Your Land about what we're up against here in the 21st century over the next 80 years. And over the course of the song, we sort of reimagined the way the media can serve communities. We reimagined the way that education can be structured, which I know you guys are engaged in here. And we talked a lot about social ecological systems and the support of those things. So, anybody have any questions before I play a song for you?
I want to hear the song.
Cool. Good. Great. All right. Awesome. Thank you for taking this in. All right. So this is a song I wrote many years ago. I was doing a lot of traveling. I traveled a lot on the Amtrak train and the Greyhound bus and in my '88 Mazda pickup truck. And one morning I woke up in Ann Arbor and the song came to me and it just came right out. Sometimes I really have to labor over songs, like work and work and work and put it down and come back to it, and then it's so nice and refreshing when the song just kind of shows up and I can silence my critic enough to get out of the way. So this is an older song. I'm going to sing it for you the way I wrote it, and then afterward I'll tell you about how a friend of mine covered it and he changed one lyric and it led to a big discussion that I want to engage you guys in. Okay. Here we go. I have no one to lift me up, don't know how to share my load. I have no lover to ease my mind, so I love the road. I have no one to show me how, but I have a guide inside. Peace is scarce in this old world, and you have no place to hide. Have no place to hide. I saw such beauty through her eyes. She said I had a home in her. I walked away from those bright eyes to become a traveler. And so I'm traveling town to town, singing songs about her eyes. I travel so I know my people, travel till I die, travel till I die. I travel for to know the land, to learn to speak for everyone. And I will work this broken world till my days are done, till my days are You guys are so sweet. Thank you. So the line I was talking about is the second to last line. I travel for to know the land, to learn to speak for everyone, and I will work this broken world until my days are done. So I have a good friend, Dan Kahn is his name. He's an expat. He lives in Berlin. He's an incredible artist, intellectual. Check him out. Daniel Kahn and the Painted Bird is his band's name. He's fluent in 6 languages, travels a lot to universities, and he's an activist. He's a real warrior. But he covered the song and he sang it for me, and he looked right at me and he changed the words to learn to speak with everyone. And he kind of like narrowed his eyes when he changed that. And then I was like, okay, yeah, fair enough, you know. So then afterward we talked about it, and he was basically saying, you know, it's idealistic to think that you can speak for everyone, because if you do a really good job of speaking for someone, you're intrinsically speaking against the beliefs of someone else. There's just too much polarity, especially in the United States right now. So that's ignorant. And I said, well, it's not something that the singer of the song has mastered yet. It's a pursuit. So to learn to speak for everyone is a pursuit that I think more people should engage in. And if we did, you know, perhaps we would start to bridge this chasm, if that makes any sense. So we had a really good conversation about it, but I wanted to throw it out there to you guys to see what you think. Anyone have any ruminations? Yeah.
Don't take offense to this. I do wonder, like, saying that we could potentially or should even try to learn to speak for everyone, especially like being white or being male or being straight or having some sort of like privileged identity. What do you think about that, or how does that come into that conversation for you?
Exactly. Yeah. So in that regard, as a straight white male who I acknowledge I have been born into privilege, I think it's important to try to understand someone else's position in an effort to speak with them and, you know, create space for them that I unfairly have been born into.
I think that's great too, because when you talk about creating space for other voices, that maybe that's better than speaking for them, because if you sort of learn about other people's identities and then take on the role of speaking for them, then that can be problematic, right? Instead of carving out space for them to speak for themselves.
I also think about that history a little bit of like the, you know, music as like revolution thing, right? So the for everyone, like, oh, okay, well, so-and-so is the voice of a movement, right? Mm-hmm. And so it is, you know, it's funny because you're not necessarily speaking for everyone in the whole world, but you are speaking for everyone in that movement, like the things these people care about. So that's actually how that line has always felt to me, that it's like for for the people who care about the things I care about, which is like being kind to each other and thinking about these issues of resilience and how to be in the world together, right? So it's kind of interesting to me because I've done a little bit of work in that whole like, what do movement songs do in the world from a sort of activity theory perspective, right? What do they do in the world? Where do they go? Who listens to them? And so I think that's an interesting idea too, is that music does do that, right? Like when you have that thing where you had a bad day and you're listening to music, it's speaking for you, right? It's speaking your pain for you in some ways. So I think that's interesting use of that preposition also, for, because for doesn't necessarily mean you don't get to speak also. You know?
I like where you're coming from though. Yeah.
I was saying, like, when you say speak for, like, I just thought it was kind of like an idealistic, like, leader of a movement, like you were saying. So, like, I was just kind of thinking back to, like, all the major movements where, like, Gandhi or, like, Martin Luther King, they spoke for the movement, like she was saying. So I think that when your friend said learn to speak with everyone, I think that's really important to learn to speak for. You have to be able to understand what everybody wants so that you can speak in representation of them. So
you have to speak with in order to get to speak for.
Yeah.
Erica?
It makes me think too, like thinking of like activity as far as chat goes. Like also you sang a song for us, having like people from different groups all sing the song together, and how like that actual community aspect could kind of bring kind of both points together, where you have space for others than, you know, the straight white male, and then you also have like, and we can all speak for these various groups too. So like, do you ever, I guess I can ask a question, like sing in the same song multiple people at a time, like not just a band, but like multiple bands coming together? Is that something that happens in the work you do?
Yeah, I love collaboration, and bringing musicians together is one of my favorite pastimes. But yeah, getting people around, songs, around movements. I have done a lot of work around freshwater advocacy, which manifests very strongly in Michigan as an environmental pursuit and a social justice pursuit. You have like the dichotomy of the Flint water crisis and the Detroit water shutoffs, and then over on the west side of the state, Nestle is being basically subsidized to pump hundreds of millions of Great Lakes water into bottles, and how do you reconcile that? It's racial capitalism, it's also ecological disaster. But we need to be proactive around it and not to be crushed by the weight of these things too. So in order for people to be inspired toward governance, they need some creative beacons, and I'm interested in taking artists, a community of artists, to the task of rising to the occasion of like writing about art, or writing about water, or having interdisciplinary collaboration, multimedia stuff. So I started an event called the Water Festival around that, and it's a platform for people who are already doing freshwater activism, or people who found themselves in the middle of a crisis and are a voice for it. And it's also a festival where you have art and music, and you have musicians sort of being challenged to understand an issue and then speak for the people, and to use that platform in that way. But I thought it was an interesting thing, and I switch back and forth when I sing it now, depending on how I'm feeling. But it really goes back to governance for me too, and how hard that is. It's really hard. It's hard to sit down at a table with people that you all agree with and come to a consensus. Co-housing and like cooperative living is challenging. We all have challenges with our own families, especially when we get at that bigger like holiday table and some of the uncles that you don't agree with start going on. It's hard, but it's sort of like, if we can get good at sitting at a table and listening to each other, we can transform the United States, and we have to. So as a writer too, just thinking about how much one word or like one phrase in a poem can change the whole way that it feels is really powerful. And for me, this kind of made me think about editing a song after it's done. It's recorded, it's been on an album for 10 years, and then I can change it still because I'm in charge of my songs, And then again, like, he changed it. My friend covered it and made it his own. And in folk music, we call that the folk process. It's something that kind of happens naturally. We take what we need for the times that we live in and leave the rest behind. So time is flying. Anybody have any questions for me now? Just kind of open Q&A. I know Joyce has got a couple.
I do. I have a list. Okay, so I think this is good for these guys because I know they have to leave pretty soon. So I'm gonna ask this question about. So Seth has started this thing called the Earthwork Music Collective, and you can, if you Google it, you can find it online. It is a sort of a process of bringing musicians together and also doing sort of collaborative music making. So trying to have it be. Actually, I think maybe even left over a little bit from the days when it was like you had to have a lot of money to produce an album, right? And so if we share some of these tasks and share some of the money making that needs to happen in order to make music, we can do better. So the question that our team had from looking at all your stuff was, what sparked the founding of the Earthwork Music Collective, and what are your visions for moving it forward? So that was a question that they had.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I put out my first album in 2001, and the record industry was already sort of collapsing. It was shifting a lot. This was right before Napster. It was before streaming, but the big labels were already sort of clinging to ways of doing business that weren't as viable anymore. I mentioned I grew up on this farm, and there was a lot of community around the farm, a lot of musicians coming through. Also grew up going to a lot of folk festivals and belonging to a music society in a nearby town. Really experienced the benefit of the intrinsic ability of music to bring people together, and and this is coming from some of the Earthwork like vision and mission statement, but really, it has a property of increasing awareness, like individual awareness and community awareness. And so I found myself in a peer group of a bunch of really cool people that were interested in using their music to change the world for the better, sincerely, and having a hell of a good time as much as possible doing it. So we found ourselves, in some ways inheriting some of this culture in Michigan that we really were fortunate to grow up in, as sort of like a multi-generational, collaborative, cooperative musical community. But we wanted to get a little bit more focused and organized without taking away our individual freedom, because independent artists are freelance artists, and within the Earthwork vision, I felt that it was really important for everybody to be able to be in control of their career. But we come together around the things that we stand for. So in the beginning, it was a pretty small crew, and we were all kind of figuring it out. We had some mentors that helped us, and the farm was a key place. So I started the Earthwork Harvest Gathering in 2001 when I launched my first album. And the collective and the Harvest Gathering have both grown incrementally year after year. A lot of it has been through grassroots support and like personal development. So as those parallel charts are sort of expanding, the Harvest Gathering has grown to an event that hosts 3,600 people this year. We had at the family farm, 4 stages, 125 bands, 70 workshops in 3 different locations, food from like 40 different farms. So it all has happened slowly, but the circle has become wider, and the community has gotten bigger, but a lot of the core values are still there. And then with the Harvest Gathering, some of the artists have gone into like bigger national touring, international touring, making bigger records, working with producers. Some people are very content to keep it closer to home and to, really have a smaller radius. I love the fact that it's not prescribing to a certain way to succeed as a musician. If you have a life full of music and a way to express yourself, that's great. We're all on equal footing. There are people who want to go on national TV. There are people who, want to play at festivals in Mexico. There are people that they just wrote their best song and they haven't made an album in 5 years, and they don't really feel like making an album this year. And it's like, we want to influence each other in a positive way, JFK said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." So if something's going well for someone, the idea of being in a collective is that it's benefiting everyone, and we're not in competition. We're helping each other intrinsically through that model. But at the same time, I think it's really important to support artists in artistic freedom, and that having a community that's more diverse is going to be a more resilient community, and nature teaches us that too. So we have, it started with mostly folk singers, but now we've got some great rock and roll bands, a couple amazing rappers that are activists. We have, a couple people who do mostly kids music at this point, like family stuff. And then, a lot of people who are sort of iconoclastic, and I think it's cool. It's like the globalization of music is pretty wonderful. Everybody can be interested in everything, and we find value in everything, and it's an exchange of culture that I think is really healthy. So moving forward, I'm excited to do more work throughout the state around clean water issues in the 2018 elections coming up. I'm starting a campaign called the Clean Water Candidate Campaign, working with a bunch of musicians, trying to just really collaborate, instigate collaboration in all these different communities. So like going to Flint, finding some of the best freshwater activists. There's a woman there, Cecilia, who's been, affected in a very, very profound way by the Flint water crisis. A couple amazing musicians, hoping to bring the musicians together to collaborate with a local filmmaker and interview Cecilia, and bam, we have little 1-minute pieces of content that we roll out over the next 6 months that frame the elections around water. And it's all using creativity, using notable Michiganders who have, a certain amount of recognition to prop up an issue that's relevant to all of us, and in doing so, cut out some of the crap from an election cycle and fix some of what has been a colossal failure of governance. For me, I feel like as the network gets bigger and stronger, and my own ability to command my own creative powers and language becomes stronger, and I feel more confident, I feel like I can do work that can affect more people in a big way, in a good way. And I really prescribe to this idea of servant leadership, that the best kind of leadership serves and it makes everybody else feel like they're leading, and those are the leaders that I've been attracted to and empowered by. And also, something that a mentor told me when I was just starting, I was like an undergrad at U of M, is just give yourself permission. That's ultimately what you have to do. So you can have all the support in the world, but until you give yourself permission, there will be a switch that hasn't been turned on in your mind and in your heart. But as soon as you do, the door is wide open, and gratitude and positivity will keep those doors open as well, because you don't have control over how you're treated or what happens in the world, but you do have control of your reactions. And the people that I know who keep doors open for themselves, they approach life with a lot of positivity and a lot of gratitude. And even if they've been mistreated, they have the strength of character to react with kindness. And that there's nothing more powerful than that. If you can do that, you will transform your life and pretty much do whatever you want. That, along with work ethic and discernment. Obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where you're being mistreated. But if you can control your reactions and be self-determined toward what you're headed toward, and make sure that that's something that benefits people, people are going to take care of you, and they're going to learn from you and follow that same model, and it's going to be the transformation that we need right now. And the cool thing is, there are a lot of people that we can learn from that are doing just that. And the more you sort of look out for that, the more you'll attract those people into your life.
Okay, so I know you guys have to take off in just like 3 minutes. So I want to say a thing that I thought was pretty cool. I just got a text from my husband, who's also a friend of Seth, and he said that he wants to subsidize anybody who wants a CD. So did you bring CDs? Okay.
I did.
So before you guys go, Seth's going to haul out some CDs, and he's going to count how many you have, and Tony's going to pay for them. So you can just take one and go. Yeah. Because my husband's a prince like that, basically.
so sweet.
So thank you so much for coming, you guys, and Seth, if you want to bust out your stuff, and then if you can stick around. For those of you who are here